Hello and welcome to another episode of BTech. So we got the 2JZ block back. It's been decked and honed, and it's been a line board for the steel main caps, which I'll show you in a bit. You can see it's a cast iron block. Obviously we want to paint it. It's got a little bit of surface rust on there. All the freeze caps are off for the cleaning. So what we're going to do is we're going to prep it for painting. I am going to acetone off any of the oil that we have on the mating surfaces, etc. I'm just going to acetone off the little bits that got on the block. Then we're going to treat it with some metal prep, which is like some type of phosphoric acid to get rid of the rust. Then we're going to paint it with some Por 15 engine block paint, and then go from there. All right, let's get started. Alright, so we got the block prepped. It's got a little flash rust on there, which is fine. It'll probably actually help the Por 15 adhere. So we're gonna paint it black.
All right, now that we got the block painted, we are going to get the freeze plugs back in. Let me show you the freeze plugs I'm installing. They are the billet ones from Powerhouse Racing, which looks like this. These ones are a lot easier to get back in because unlike the kind of janky stamped steel ones, these ones are easier to hammer in. Got a nice lip on them too, so we can put some copper RTV to make sure they seal, and then they got these threads here to make it easy to use a slide hammer to get them back out. So there's two different sizes. Most of them are these 35mm ones, which will slide in here. We'll hammer them in. We'll use the RTV on the around the slip here just a little bit to make sure it seals. So we'll get you up on the tripod and we'll do one last blow down with the air hose and get to putting these in. It's acetone. All right, here's the 2JZ crank. It's a stock crank, it's a forged crank. And we just rinsed it off. Gonna have to give a little wipe on the journals. But what we did here, what we had done here, but the machinist I should say, is there's typically little balls here and here and here and here, blah, blah, blah. So what those little balls are there for is when they're originally drilling in between here for the oil passageways, they cap them with these little silver balls. Now, the reason to get those removed and then tapped with NPT threads like I have here so we can plug them is that it makes it a lot easier to really get those oil passages clean, which is what we did, and now we're going to be ready to cap them back up. After cleaning, what we did is we sprayed on some, let me show it to you, some of this Loctite Clean and Prime. Just let it sit for at least 3 to 5 minutes. And we also sprayed it on the plugs. And what this does is it helps the Loctite work. We're going to be using Loctite 277, which is red Loctite. It's very strong Loctite, because we really don't want them backing out. So let's get to installing them. This is what they look like when they're installed. All right. Now we can re-oil the crank and get the bearing clearances tested. All right, we're going to be putting the ARP studs in by hand as suggested by the instructions. And then we're going to be putting each main cap on and checking to make sure it's in round before putting the bearings in and testing bearing clearance and then putting the crank in. Let's get started. We already cleaned these holes out a bunch of times and we cleaned all the studs. To get these torqued to spec, we will be using the ARP lube on there. All right, torque to 60 on both sides, so we'll get out our bore gauge and see where we're at. We feel nice and smooth. It's a better zeroing. Now that's perfect. Just about perfect. Excellent. Now let's test the other six. The tissue's coming off clean now. Here's the main bearings we're going to be using. They're high clearance. Okay. All right, we zeroed out our dial bore gauge on the micrometer from the crank journal. So now I'll put this on the bearing itself to measure how much clearance we have. Basically seeing how much bigger is this. Measuring 1, 2, 3, just under 3 thousandths of clearance, maybe 2.8. Alright, so I've been checking the clearance between the main bearings and the crank. And the way I've been doing this is, the first thing that I did is I used my micrometer to measure the 7 main journals, which are incredibly similar to each other. Down to a tenth of a thousandth, they were all identical at 2.4413 inches. If you recall, the bores here, this thing was a line bored and a line honed with the billet main caps, and they all measured to within or under a half thousandth of each other. So they're all, to my measuring capability, identical to each other as well, which means that we have a crank with main journals that are essentially identical to each other. We have bores here that are identical to each other, as long as the bearings are also nearly identical to each other. They should all measure the same. We measured the first 6 already. So I'm just going to show you how I'm doing this by showing you how to do the number 1, which is the fatter journal. But they're all between 2. This is minimum clearance, so it's between 2 and 2.5 thousandths. These bearings have, like a lot of bearings, have eccentricity. So if we were looking kind of like down the crank, I can't draw it all, so the bearing is kind of thickest here and here. So this distance is the kind of the minimum distance. You're going to have the minimum clearance, or if you measure it from kind of here to here, you're going to get more like 3 thousandths clearance. We're measuring the minimum. which is just from the bottom to the top. So to show you how we do that, so I have my micrometer. I'm in my vise here just real lightly, and I used it to set up and zero my bore gauge we have here. So we set it up and we have it zeroed. So whatever we measure here is the clearance. We've been measuring, like I said, between 2 and 2.5, and that error may just be my ability to measure more than it is any error. So let me make sure you all can see this. It is difficult to see, so pick up the camera up. Ooh, it's hard to do with one hand. Between the glare and everything else, it's really hard to get this with the camera in this particular lighting area. Try again just to see if I can give you the experience. See how we're coming in just over 2.5 here. Each one of these gradations is a 1/2 thousandth. So we kind of find our minimum here at it. Yeah, maybe 2.75 at the most. At the minimum. Oh, there we go, 2.5. Alright, so the last one's 2.5 seconds. Let me write that down, and that's how we measure it. Alright, so this is going to be close to the end of the video now. I was going to complete building the bottom end for this video, but I'm going to decide to stop it here because I made a decision to change out how we're going to do the rings. So we're going to keep these second rings as they are, but I got off the phone with the folks from Total Seal piston rings, and they're the ones who make the piston rings that came with this kit, and this kit is from Induction Performance, but that's actually a collaboration they did with the Diamond Pistons. The Diamond makes the pistons as a part, I'm guessing, a specification from Induction Performance. That part's just a guess. Induction Performance is who sells them, and they come with the Total Seal rings, which are great rings. These are steel top rings. Again, they're excellent rings, but what I was thinking was, this is going to be an alcohol motor. It's going to be an E85 motor, and although it's mostly for race use, I do want to be able to drive the car on the street every so often. But to gap the rings to really where I need to have them to make this motor safe for really pounding on it for race use, I got to make these gaps pretty big, probably even bigger than I've already made them. And the problem with that is the bigger you make them, the safer you make it for running the motor hard so the rings don't kiss, but you get more blow by. And when running fuels like E85 or methanol, you end up getting a lot of ethanol or methanol into your oil, which adds a bunch of water to the oil and corrosion, and it's a problem. Obviously we could deal with it. We could do all the things people do to prevent that from happening. But one of the things we can do right now while we have the motor out is to use a gapless ring. You can use a gapless top ring or second ring. I'll leave that discussion to the dozens of videos on YouTube and other places and articles discussing it. I decided to go with a gapless top ring. And again, I'm not going to be going to a deep dive on gapless rings. They've been around for half a century now or something like that. Total Seal is well known for them. And really what it is you end up just having 2 rings in the top groove. In this case, you could also do it in the second groove. So basically you have, just like your top and bottom rings, you typically will have them in different orientations, but they're essentially in different orientations, but within the same groove. So it's effectively no gap. Obviously, it's actually 2 rings with gaps because they are going to expand and you want to keep them from kissing. But that gives you a near perfect seal and really cuts down on blow by to absolute minimum. So I talked to them today about my application, and they're going to make them actually based off of these rings here. I could order them new, but there's a big savings if I just mail them my current rings and they do the modification. So we'll look at the rings when we get back, when they get back. But because it's going to take a little while for that, what I'm going to do is just end the video here. When the rings come back, we can talk about the rings and finish doing the balancing, installing the pistons and the rods on the crank, and making a video about that. So we'll cut it here. Hope you're enjoying the content, and until next time, cheers.